Okay, 1 Kings chapter 6, the Bible reads, "And it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziph, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord." Now, this is actually an important verse in a few different ways. And one important thing here is that it's 480 years after Israel came out of Egypt. And what this does is it saves you a bunch of math, calculating during when the judges' time was. And with numbers like this, you can calculate approximately how old the earth is. And now it's not going to be to the minute or the hour or even to the day, because the Bible gives the time in years. Now those are probably either rounded off or rounded down, or I don't know how they would have done. Probably just to the closest one. But you can still figure out it's not millions and millions of years old. And I'm gonna fast forward through it a little bit, but we want to do this and see how old the earth comes out, and just realize I'm a human. I can make mistakes when I'm adding things. But since this is a Bible study Thursday, I figured this is a good thing to go through. So if you would, turn to Genesis chapter 5. And we're not going to read everything. I'm just going to I highlighted the names and the years, and just so you can see where I'm getting my numbers from. And we'll start in verse 3 of Genesis chapter 5. And Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his image, and called his name Seth. So the important thing, in the next verse, it says, how long he lived. After that, and in the next verse after that, it says how long he lived. So when you're calculating this, the important thing isn't how old he was when he died, but rather how old he was when the next generation was born. And it's interesting it uses Seth because it doesn't use Cain, and Abel died, right? So we don't know if Abel had any children before he died. So he was 130 years. And so then you go, well, how old was Seth when he had his first child? So in verse 6 it tells us he was 105. So when you take 130 plus 105, you drop down to verse 9, and Enos was 90 years old when he had Canaan. And then you drop down to verse 12. Canaan was 70 years old when he had Mahalaleel. So that's another 70. You drop down to verse 15. He was 65 when he had Jared. And Jared was 162 in verse 18. 162 when he had Enoch. Enoch was 65 in verse 21 when he had Methuselah. And of course, Enoch never died. So that is interesting. Enoch and Elijah are the only ones that never died. So far, we're till 687. Verse 25, Methuselah was 187 when he had Lamech. Verse 28, Lamech was 182. So now we're over 1,000. We're 1,056. And Lamech was Noah's dad. Okay? Now you say, okay, well then you go down to verse 32, and it says Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But you got to be very careful. It doesn't say he was 500 years old when he had Noah. It just says, when he had Shem. It just says Shem, Ham, and Japheth. You don't know what order that is. Who was born when he was 500 years old? So there is another verse. If you skip to Genesis chapter 9, we can figure out how old the next important time and age is. So we're 1,056 before Noah. Which, So chapter 9, verse 28, it says, Noah lived after the flood 350 years, and all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. So that tells us he was 600 years at the end of the flood. Okay, 600 years old. And remember, this could give or take almost a whole year, right? But 600 years old, according to this verse, because he lived 950 altogether, but it says after the flood he lived 350. You subtract those two and you get 600. Okay, so 600 years. So we're at 1,656 years to the end of the flood. Okay. Now we got to go to Genesis chapter 11. And it's a good thing it mentions the flood in this verse too. In verse 10, Genesis 11 verse 10, it says, These are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. So now, because it says 2 years after the flood when Arphaxad was born, you don't care how old Shem was when he had him, because we already have the time all the way to the end of the flood. Now this is 2 years after the flood, so you add the 2, and then you can keep going, okay? And so Arphaxad in verse 12 was 35 when he had Selah. And then in verse 14, Selah was 30 years old when he begat Eber. And do you notice something different? Is they're having children much earlier. And if we read through this, you see that the ages go down and go down and go down after the flood. Things aren't as perfect anymore. People aren't living as long. So, what was the last one we just did? 30 years, right? Yeah. Well, I can easily check. It was 1056 plus 600 plus 2 is 35 plus 30. Okay, so in verse 16, we have Eber was 34 when he had Peleg, so plus 34. And then Peleg in verse 18 was 30 years old when he had Reu. Verse 20, Reu was 32 when he had Serug. Verse 22, he was 30 years old when he had Nahor. And hopefully Nahor sounds familiar to you because Nahor was Abram's grandpa. Okay, so you have Nahor and then Terah and then Abram. And you could get mixed up because Abram also had a brother named Nahor. Okay, so Nahor was 29, and here's where we've got to be careful again in verse 26, because it says, and Terah lived 70 years and begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. So he's giving us a list again. But that doesn't mean that Abram was the firstborn, okay? It might be a list of importance to the story. And in fact, if you drop down to verse 32, we can see in the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Okay? Skip ahead to Genesis 12, verse 4. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. Okay? So Terah dies, and then Abram leaves Haran. And so he was 75 years old when they departed out of Haran. So you take the 205 years that Terah was old, subtract the 75, and then you realize that Terah was 130 years old when he had Abram. There's a kind of a gap, right? The first one was at 70 years, and Abram was at 130 years. So you can see how you can make a big mistake there in the years so far. I'm just going to take a minute here just to quickly recap, just in case I made a mistake here. 130 plus 105 plus 9. 130 plus 105 plus 90 plus 70 plus 65 plus 162 plus 65 plus 187, that was Methuselah, plus 182, and then Noah. So yeah, 1056, so that was where I did it right before, plus 600, plus 2, plus 35, plus 30, plus 34, plus 30, plus 32, plus 30, plus 29, and then now we're adding the 130 years old till when Abraham was born. Okay, so remember 2008. So from the day that Adam was created till the day that Abraham was born, his name was Abram at that time, is 2008 years. Okay? And we're just over that, like a few decades, or just over a decade, more than that, since Jesus was born. Okay? So 2008. And so we know now that Terah was 130 when Abram was born. Now let's go to Genesis chapter 25. Genesis chapter 25, verse 26. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. Oh, sorry, I skipped Isaac. Genesis 21, verse 5. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. So that's another 100. And then this verse that I skipped ahead to, and his name is called Jacob, and Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. So Isaac was 60 years old when Jacob and Esau were born. So that's another 60. Okay, so when Jacob was born, we're now 2,168 years since the start of time. And you know, you're starting to see the picture how this verse in 1 Kings chapter 6 saves you a lot of work, because it goes right from the time that they went into Egypt till the 4th year of Solomon's reign. So, but there's one more number before we get into Egypt. Genesis chapter 47. Genesis chapter 47, verse 9. This is when the children of Israel went into Egypt. Genesis 47, verse 9, the Bible says, And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers and the days of their pilgrimage. So we can see that Jacob was 130 years old when he went into Egypt. So add another 130. We're at now 2,298 when they went into Egypt. And now we get a couple of we could call them cheats, because we don't have to add up all the ages. Go to Exodus chapter 12, verse 40. Exodus chapter 12, verse 40. The Bible says in Exodus 12, verse 40, Now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the self same day it came to pass that all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. So 430 years to the date. That's accurate, right? 430. And people mess this up because it talks, there's a different verse that talks about they're going to be under affliction for 400 years. Well, guess what? The first 30 years wasn't so bad because they still had that same Pharaoh, and Joseph was around and things were okay. Okay? So it's 430. It's not 400. It's 430 years till they got out of Egypt. And so that's 2728. We're getting close to 3,000 years. Now we're finally up to 1 Kings chapter 6, because in verse 1 it said, "And it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziph," which is the 2nd month, "that he began to build the house of the Lord." So this is when the house of the Lord is beginning to be built. And this is also an important milestone in Israel's history. Okay? So they got out of Egypt and they were using the tabernacle till now. And now they're starting to build this temple, which we'll get into a little bit more. But it's 480 years since then. But it's the 4th year of Solomon's reign. So we're going to subtract 4. Okay? So we'll just add 476 and then we'll figure from the beginning of Solomon's reign. So add 476. We're now at 3204. 3,204. Now, we won't go to all the verses for the kings. I'm just going to list them. I went through them, and I got how long, and I'll just tell you how long they reigned. So, and just to double check, I didn't even look up Solomon. I believe he's 40 years, so that I didn't even bother looking him up. But anybody can confirm that? Hey, can you just double check that? I'm pretty sure he was 40 years, so we'll just use 40 for now. And all the rest of them I have written down. So we got 40 for Solomon. Then it was Rehoboam 17, Abijam 3, Asa 41, Jehoshaphat 25. And what's interesting is Asa and Jehoshaphat were both good kings, and they had a little bit longer reigns. Ahaziah 1, and then Ahaziah died, so his mom took over the throne and killed all the rest of the children that could inherit the king, except she didn't get a Joash. Okay, so she was queen for 6 years. And then Joash was for 40, Amaziah 29. Azariah, also called Uzziah, was 52. Jotham 16, Ahaz 16. Hezekiah 29. You see, Hezekiah was also a good king. Manasseh was not a good king, so this goes against, if you want to say, prosperity, you'll do good and you'll always get blessed, and the bad always get punished. Well, Manasseh reigned for 55 years. And then Ammon for 2, Josiah for 31, and then Jehoahaz 3 months, and Eliakim, who is also called Jehoiakim, 11 years, and then Jehoiakim 3 months, and he went into Babylon. Okay? And we'll get to that a little bit. We'll just tally up all the kings right now. So we were at 3204 plus 40 plus 17 plus 3 plus 41 plus 25 plus 1 plus 6 plus 40 plus 29 plus 52 plus 16 plus 16 plus 29 plus 55 plus 2 plus 31, and then we have, and we won't count the 2-3 months for now, so you just remember that half a year, because there's probably half a year somewhere that it got rounded off. So we're at 3618. 3618 after the kings. Was it 40 years? Yeah, okay, so I was right. I just want to verify, because I don't like to just guess at things. So 36:18. And just for reference, 374 plus 40. The kings were 414 and a half years from Solomon's start of Solomon to when Jehoiakim went into captivity. So 414 years. So we're at 3,618 years. So now turn to 2 Kings 24, verse 8. 2 Kings 24, verse 8. We're almost done with our calculations here. Thank you for bearing with me. So 2 Kings 24, verse 8, it says, Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. Okay? And his mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord according to all that his father had done. At that time the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against the city, and his servants did besiege it. And Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother, and his servants, and his princes, and his officers. And the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. And when it says the 8th year of his reign, it was the king of Babylon's 8th year, not Jehoiakim, because he's just been there 3 months. Okay? So, we already got those 3 months. Okay? If we haven't put it in as a half, because those 3 months and 3 months probably could have rounded out somebody else's year, but you can count it if you want. So, now here's where we get into history. History books tell us when Nebuchadnezzar started to reign. And it says he started to reign in 605 BC. So 605 years before Christ was born. And when you read through these kings, in the first year of King so-and-so, that's why we have the year 2020. It's the year of the King Jesus, 2020 years into, if he would have started his earthly reign, right? But he was born in 2020 years ago, okay? That's where we get to 2020. But first, we got to add, so 605 BC, but it's in the 8th year of his reign. So because you're backwards, 605, you got to subtract 8. You're at, I could do math in the 590, 605, 597, right? 597 plus 8 would be 605, right? Yeah. So we have to add those 597 years, because 605 years before 0, you could say, was when he started to reign, but it's not quite 605. You got to take 8 from that 605, so you're at 597. So 3618 plus 597 would get us to 0, which is 4215, and we now have 2020, which bring us to 6,235 years. Now, I could have missed something, right? I could have, just like it would have been easy with Abraham's day of his birth, or Noah's, time, because of the flood, and not, it just lists him and his 2 brothers, so I could have made a mistake, but you can see it's roughly 62, 63, somewhere in their 100 years. So when we see something like this in 1 Kings chapter 6, we shouldn't just blow past it. This is important information, because this is history from the beginning of time till when our history books pick it up, besides the Bible, okay? So then we know that the earth isn't millions of years old. It's not even 10,000 years old. It's somewhere in the neighborhood between 6,000 and 7,000 years old, okay? And the quick calculations I did during the sermon and for preparing for the sermon brings it at 6,235. And I'm like I said, I might have missed somebody, added wrong, so on. So now let's get to the rest of the chapter. So it was the 480th year since the children of Israel came out. And this is the 4th year of Solomon's reign. And he's beginning to build the house of the Lord. And so I think this is a good start to his reign, because it's only 4 years into his mandate and he's ready building God's house. And he started preparing like basically right away. David had already prepared for this house. Verse 2, and the house which King Solomon built for the Lord, the length thereof was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 20 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits. So let's put this into numbers that we can understand. Who understands feet and inches? Who understands meters and centimeters better? So basically everybody, even though we're in Canada, we understand feet better. So this makes it easy because a cubit is 1.5 feet, right? From your elbow to the tip of your finger, 18 inches. So when it says how long this house was, it says 80 cubits. A score is 20, so 80 is 60. So that means it was 90 feet long, okay? Now if I would have to guess, this room here is probably 45 feet long. So it would be twice as long as this room, approximately. I haven't measured this. I'm just guessing that it's about 45 feet. And then it was 20 cubits wide, which would be 30 feet wide. And this room is probably 22 feet wide, something like that. So it would be wider than this and twice as long. So you can see it's not a square. It was 30 feet wide and 90 feet long. So it's 3 times as long as it is wide. But then it's also 30 cubits high. So it's 45 feet tall. In here we have probably 9-foot ceilings, maybe a little bit taller, maybe 10-foot ceilings. And it would be 4.5 times that at the minimum. Like that's pretty tall. And especially for the width. And then long. Like that would be like a great big hall. And then in verse 3, and the porch before the temple of the house, 20 cubits was the length thereof. So it says it was before the temple of the house. So in the narrow part, the 20 cubits, there's a porch that goes the full width. Okay? And then according to the breadth of the house, so it's according to the breadth, and it already told us that the breadth was 20 cubits, and 10 cubits was the breadth thereof before the house. So ahead of the house of the Lord, it was 10 cubits, so 15-foot deep porch. Okay, I think when we redid our house there, we did like a 7-foot overhang. So if you know how big our house was, this would be about twice as deep of a porch. So 15-foot deep. And in verse 4, and for the house he made windows and narrow lights. And against the wall of the house he built chambers round about, against the walls of the house round about, both of the temple and of the oracle, and he made chambers round about. Now I won't be able to keep explaining this because I get lost at some point here. Okay? But what I have so far figured I'm going to explain to you, and it sounds like around that 30 by 90 by 45 foot building, they're building rooms around the outside of it, okay? Because it says roundabout. And this is kind of interesting. Look at verse 6. The nethermost chamber, when it says nether means lower, okay? So the lowest chamber, and a chamber is just a room. So the nethermost chamber was 5 cubits broad. So 5 cubits is 7.5 feet. That's about 6, okay? So give it another 1.5 feet. So it's not the biggest room, but I mean it's not that small either, because a lot of bedrooms in new houses are like, a small bedroom would be about 8 by 10, right? So it would be a little bit narrower. But so 5 cubits, 7.5 feet broad. And then it says, and the middle was 6 cubits broad. So the lowest one was 5, and then the next one up was 6. So it's wider. And remember, you're up against on one side the wall of the temple. You're going, so it's overhanging by 1 cubit, 18 inches. It's got 18-inch overhang. And then the third story was 7 cubits, also another cubit overhang. And believe it or not, this was a more common thing to do even in England's history and different places. is because, and I don't think this was the case here, but they would sometimes do that. So at the street level, you would have it wider, but then when you're above horse and person height, then you can overhang and get more room out of it. So your footprint at the bottom was smaller, and who knows, maybe you even had to do with tax. And I'm not saying that this is obviously not what's going on with the temple, but I'm just saying that method of construction, it was used throughout history, where the second story was wider than the lower story. So you got 18 inches, and then you got another 18 inches. So the third story was 3 foot out further than the bottom room. It's kind of interesting. Keep going, verse 6. For without in the wall of the house he made narrow rests about, that the beams should not be fastened in the wall of the house. So they didn't nail on those beams. They just sat in, like, I'm assuming pockets. Because remember, the house is being made of stone, so they probably just left a gap there so that the wooden beam could rest in there. Okay. Verse 7. And the house, when it was in building, was built of stone, made ready before it was brought thither, so that there was neither hammer, nor axe, nor any tool of iron heard in the house while it was in the building. Now this is amazing, because anybody else got any experience with building something, you measure all careful, and you get it to there, and it's still a 1/4 inch too long or something, and you got to cut it off. Or there's a saying that I've heard before in a place that makes trailers. They would say, one of the employees there said, it's precision made but hammer fitted. Okay? So no matter how careful you measure, something's maybe a little bit out of square or something, or you forgot to incorporate something, right? And you got to tap it in because it's just a little bit too wide or what. No, here everything was made exactly to the right measurement. There was no hammering, there was no sawing, there was no tools. No hammer, nor axe, nor any tool of iron. You didn't hear, it wasn't like a normal construction site. You didn't hear all that noise. It was just lifting into place. It says, nor any tool of iron heard in the house. That doesn't, they might have used iron tools, but not ones that actually made noise. Like that's what I'm thinking of is a trowel to put the mortar in between the stones maybe. But who says there was any mortar? Those stones might have been fit so closely they could just sit on each other. So definitely no tools were heard on site, but I wonder if any tools were even used on site, like tools of iron. Like they might have used pulleys and so on to lift things up, and scaffolding and ramps and so on. Because the whole structure is 45 foot tall, you gotta think they would have used some kind of scaffolding, right? 45 foot tall, like that would be like a four-story building here. So it's actually pretty interesting how they built this temple, and they figured out everything off-site. And you don't think, they probably did have some kind of plans. Obviously they had a plan, but I'm saying like as in paper plans, probably not stamped by an engineer, okay? Not issued for construction, but they had some kind of plans, and they measured everything ahead of time before they got to the site. They made all their pieces right, they calculated all, and then they assembled it on site. And they didn't have to quickly saw off a little piece. And remember, they're bringing stones there. You don't want to bring a stone way back to off site again to adjust your measurement. You want to make sure it fits before you bring it there, because they had some pretty great stones, like big stones. And it gives us some measurements of some of those stones, how many cubits big they were. They weren't just stones. Some of them, I'd have to double check, but I thought there were some that were like 4 or 5 or 7 cubits big. Like some of them were pretty big. I'd have to look it up. Let's look at verse 8. The door for the middle chamber was on the right side of the house. Okay, so let's just say we're looking at it from the front. The right side of the house, there was a door for the middle chamber, and they went up with winding stairs into the middle chamber, and out of the middle into the third. So it sounds like they got like a spiral staircase in there. Okay, when it says winding, the term winding stairs still used. Like so, one part of the tread is narrower than the other one. The outside is wider. So that way you can use a staircase in a smaller area. If it wasn't a spiral, at least it had a bunch of landings, but it sure sounds like it was spiral. Verse number 9. So he built the house and finished it and covered the house with beams and boards of cedar. You wonder where the wood comes in, that they sent all those people to hew in the mountains. Well, here we're starting to see the wood. Here's cedar. So they covered the house with beams and boards of cedar. So obviously, there is a way to make a stone roof, but it sounds like they put beams across and they got wooden rafters and beams and stuff like that. And then they covered it with boards of cedar. And what's good about cedar is the rot resistance. And it looks pretty, smells nice. Verse 10, and then he built chambers against all the house, 5 cubits high, and they rested on the house with timbers of cedar. So you're wondering how high these rooms were. They had 3 stories. Each one was 5 cubits high, so 7.5 feet high. So that's 22.5 feet high. You're only halfway up that 45-foot building with those 3 rooms, even on the outside. Those 3 stories. And I don't know if it was the full length or not, but when you read in, forget if it was Ezra or Nehemiah, where he leaves for a bit, and he comes back, and somebody let somebody crash in one of the rooms that was meant for the house of God. And I wish I remember if it was Ezra or Nehemiah. He takes the guy's stuff, he throws it out of there, just dumps it on the ground, and that was supposed to be for storing God's stuff, not for this. I think it was Tobiah that was living in there. So that would have, obviously this temple got broken, but they would have tried to build it like this later. Verse 11, and the word of the Lord came to Solomon, saying, concerning this house which thou art in building, if thou wilt walk in my statutes and execute my judgments and keep all my commandments to walk in them, then will I perform my word with thee, which I spake unto David thy father, and I will dwell among the children of Israel, and will not forsake my people Israel. So here we see there's a condition that he won't forsake the people of Israel. If, they'll walk in his statutes and execute the judgments and keep all his commandments. Okay? It wasn't an unconditional. We see that that's a condition here. Verse 14. So Solomon built the house and finished it. And he built the walls of the house within with boards of cedar, with the floor of the house and the walls of the ceiling, and he covered them on the inside with wood, and covered the floor of the house with planks of fir. So it sounds like they covered everything, ceiling, walls, floor with cedar, and then he's put fir on the floor yet. Or maybe that means except for the floor, and they put fir on the floor. But it would make sense to me if they did cedar first too, for the extra rot resistance on the floor, and then they put fir. Definitely planks of fir on the floor. And remember, they were cutting fir trees and cedar trees. Those were the 2 main ones they were cutting out in Lebanon, in King Hiram's land there. And they brought them in floats, along the sea, and then they brought them inland. So Solomon built the house and finished it. Okay, we finished verse 16. And he built 20 cubits on the sides of the house, both the floor and the walls with boards of cedar. He even built them for it within, even for the oracle, even for the most holy place, and the house that is the temple before it was 40 cubits long. And so you might wonder, what is an oracle? I'll read you the definition. And close the page. Here we go. Oracle. I'm just going to read some of these. An utterance, often ambiguous or obscure, given by a priest or priestess at a shrine as a response of a god to an inquiry. Now, obviously, that's a pagan kind of oracle. Number 2, the agency or medium giving such responses. 3, a shrine or place at which such responses were given. So it sounds like this oracle is a place where God speaks to man. Okay, so where he could talk to the priest. And remember, Jesus Christ later, that veil was taken away, and we could have direct communication with God through Jesus Christ. We didn't have to have the high priest go in there once a year. So everything here is symbolic, and everything in here was made after the pattern shown to him in pattern that was in heaven. And for the tabernacle, Moses was shown it in heaven, of the one that was in heaven. And so all these things represent other things. And I've heard some good sermons about what the different parts represent, and we don't have time to get into it today. But it's very interesting. This isn't just a building. This represents different things like salvation and and future events and so on. So an oracle is where I think it was in the holy place, or the most holy place. Like I said, I'm not an expert on the temple, and I think there's purposely things left out so we don't try to build it again. I actually just read it in the news, and you know that they're going to try to take advantage of it, right? The cure to this coronavirus is building the third temple in Jerusalem. See, you can hear already that they're trying to get that Antichrist temple set up. Now, it might not happen now, but they're just trying to plant a seed, right? The next time we have a world disaster, we got to build the temple in Jerusalem. And so many Christians get tricked into this, that we need a temple. We don't need a temple built with hands anymore, okay? We are the temple of God, right? The Holy Spirit lives within us now, okay? It's not a temporary thing now in the New Testament. We don't need a temple anymore. Jesus was the Lamb slain once for all, okay? We don't need any more animal sacrifices. Jesus was the final sacrifice. Verse number 17. The house that is the temple before it was 40 cubits long. And the cedar of the house within was carved with knops and open flowers. All was cedar. There was no stone seen. So beautiful cedar already. And then they carved knops and open flowers. Now you wonder, what's a knop? I looked it up. Knop is just a knob. Okay? Now it makes sense because to me, when I see the word knop, I think of the Low German word knop, which could be a knot, but it could also be a bud on a plant, right? A knoppen or a knop. So you have, I think knops could be a button, or sorry, a knob, but I think it's like a bud and then a flower, a bud and a flower. And, I heard a really good sermon, and there's a different place where there's a pomegranate, there's a bell and a pomegranate, and I heard Pastor Anderson explain, like, bell is like the gospel being preached, and the pomegranate is the fruit that results from that. And I think we can see here that, like, the bud is the start of the fruit, and the flower is the fruit, blooming in a similar kind of way. And pomegranate, in case you don't know, if you never tried it, it's just filled with seeds, so it's very fruitful. It has a lot of seeds in it, and so in here we have on these walls, in the cedar, there was knops and open flower. So basically, a closed flower and an open flower. All with cedar, there's no stone seen. So all the stone was covered. First of all, they got these big stones, and now they're covering it. In verse 19, the oracle he prepared in the house within to set there the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And the oracle in the forepart was 20 cubits in length and 20 cubits in breadth. So it sounds like there was another 30 by 30 building in the house, like inside of that. And I see, this is where I kind of get lost. I don't know how exactly this is set up. But 20 by 20 and 20 height. So it's only 2/3 of the height. And he overlaid it with pure gold, and so covered the altar, which was of cedar. So beautiful cedar, and now they're covering it with gold. And gold is beautiful too, right? So you think, well, why wouldn't they use this pine or spruce and then covered it with gold? No, this is the temple of God, but they're going to do it right? So they're going to use even cedar, and cedar's, insect and rot resistant, right? So then cover it with gold. Overlaid with gold. Verse 22, and the whole house he overlaid with gold, until he finished all the house. Also the whole altar that was by the oracle he overlaid with gold. So everything is covered in gold. The beautiful wood, now it's all covered with gold. It's beautiful gold. Now I just wonder if it says the whole house, but did they do the floor? Because gold, you'd think, they would have to make sure their feet were clean or something, because gold would scratch. Like gold is the softest metal that I know of. Like it would just, you think it would wear away, especially if people drag their feet and have dust on their feet or whatever. So anyways, it said it overlaid the whole house, overlaid the house within with pure gold. Verse 22, we read that. Verse 23, and within the oracle he made 2 cherubims of olive trees, each 10 cubits high. And we'll get into what a cherubim is, or what cherubims are, but they're made of olive tree, a different wood, and they're each 10 cubits high, so 15 foot high out of this 45-foot building, so 1/3 of the whole inside wall. Although this is within the oracle, which was only 12 20 cubits, so it was 30 feet high. So this would take up half of the height, okay? So it's pretty tall if you think 15 foot high, this engravings, or however you want to call it, these cherubims. And 5 cubits was the one wing of the cherub, so 5 cubits, so 7.5 feet. Like, this is only like 2.5 feet or something, so it would be, 3 times that. So 5 cubits was the one wing of the cherub, and 5 cubits the other wing of the cherub. From the uttermost part of the one wing onto the uttermost part of the other were 10 cubits. So the whole wingspan was 10 cubits, and there's 2 of them, right? So it's 20 cubits altogether because they were touching in the middle. And the other cherub was 10 cubits. Both the cherubims were of one measure and one size. The height of the one cherub was 10 cubits, and so it was of the other cherub. And he set the cherubims within the inner house. So you do not have to know Hebrew. Here you can already see that cherub is one, and more than one is cherubim. So you can see that adding that I am is plural in Hebrew. Okay? So cherubims were more than one. And he set the cherubims within their inner house, and they stretched forth the wings of the cherubims, so that the wing of the one touched the one wall, the wing of the other touched the other wall, and their wings touched one another in the midst of the house. So you got one, he's touching the wall, the wing is touching here, and then his wing goes to the wing of this other one, and then that one touches the wall on that side. So it's the whole wall, and it was 10 cubits high out of, I think it was a 20 cubit high building, or room, oracle. So let's go to Ezekiel chapter 1. Let's find out what these cherubims are, what they look like. Ezekiel chapter 1. Ezekiel chapter 1. We'll start there in verse 4. And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it, and out of the midst thereof as the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire. Also out of the midst thereof came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. And every one had 4 faces, and every one had 4 wings. And their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot. So it wasn't like a human foot, it was like the way a calf's foot is. And they sparkled like the color of burnished brass. And they had the hands of a man under their wings on their 4 sides. And they 4 had their faces and their wings. Their wings were joined one to another. They turned not when they went every one straight forward. Well, I guess if you got faces every 4 direction, you're going forward whichever direction you're going, right? You're not really backing up because you're looking where you're going because you got 4 faces. And here's in verse 10, it tells us what the faces are like. As for the likeness of their faces, they 4 had the face of a man and the face of a lion on the right side, and they 4 had the face of an ox on the left side. They 4 also had the face of an eagle. And I've heard some good sermons about what these 4 things represent. We have 4 gospels, and each gospel kind of focuses a different way. For instance, the lion is like the king of the jungle. It's the kingly. And, the ox is more of a workman, and humanity, and the eagle is I think, power. There's different things you can get into. You can dig. This isn't just a building. This isn't just cherubims. There's so much. The Bible is so deep, I think we could just, even after we're in heaven, we could just study it and love it for eternity. But you can see here these animals, or these beasts, with 4 wings, and then with 2 sets of hands, like 1 set of hands yet. So 4 wings and hands, and they got 1 face of a man, and a lion, and an eagle, and an ox. Okay? And it keeps on going and lists some other things. For instance, very interesting, verse 14. And the living creatures ran and returned as the appearance of a flash of lightning. So just like boom, boom, and like a flash of lightning. They ran away and they came back in a flash of lightning. They're really quick. And they got wheels and so on. Let's go to Ezekiel chapter 10. Ezekiel chapter 10. So here he's seeing them again in Ezekiel 10 verse 9. And when I looked, behold, the 4 wheels by the cherubims, 1 wheel by 1 cherub, and another wheel by another cherub. And the appearance of the wheels was as the color of a beryl stone, And as for their appearances, they four had one likeness, as if a wheel had been in the midst of a wheel. So there's four of these cherubims, okay, and they all look the same. When they went upon their four sides. They turned not as they went, but the place whither the head looked, they followed it. They turned not as they went. So they didn't turn to go. It's just, they want to go that way, they just go this way. If they want to go that way, they go like this. They don't turn to go. Kind of like you see some insects that are like that. They fly and then all of a sudden they can just go like this or like this. Was it a dragonfly that does that? Maybe? I think so. And there's insects that do it. And this is how these cherubs did it. They didn't have to turn. Like an animal always wants to have its head facing where it's going. Well, this thing has four faces. It doesn't need to turn. So they didn't turn. Verse 12, and their whole body and their backs and their hands and their wings and the wheels were full of eyes round about, even the wheels that they four had. So not only did they have four faces, they were covered in eyes. Okay. As for the wheels, it was cried unto them in my hearing, O wheel. And every one had four faces. The first face was the face of a cherub, and the second face was the face of a man, and the third the face of a lion, and the fourth the face of an eagle. And the cherubims were lifted up. This is the living creature that I saw by the river of Kibar. So this is the one that he saw before. But when you compare it, what's missing from before? An ox. But instead, you have a cherub. So a cherub looks like an ox. Now, I don't know which face was in these cherubs that were in the temple, okay? But a cherub is recognized as a face of an ox. And if we go to Ezekiel 28. So you wonder, why would they have this in the temple? Well, these are like angelic like creatures, and they give glory to God, and I think they're in heaven and so on. So, and remember, this was for the name of God in this temple. Why wouldn't you have cherubims? Up in heaven, he's got cherubims. Why not have cherubims in the oracle? Okay, so chapter 28. This is talking about the king of Tyrus, but it's also talking about somebody else. Let's look at verse 13. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. See, Tyrus never was in the garden of Eden, okay? Thou hast been in the garden, Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering. The sardius, topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and gold. The workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the days that thou wast created till iniquity was found in thee. So this is talking about Satan. So he was an angel. He was perfect in his ways until iniquity was found in him. Okay? So Satan is a fallen angel, right? God made him. He was supposed to be, a servant of God, but he decided he was prideful. He wanted to be like God, and so he rebelled. By the multitude of thy merchandise they have filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned. Therefore I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God, and I will destroy thee, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. I will cast thee to the ground. I will lay thee before kings, that they may behold thee. Thou hast defiled thy sanctuaries by the multitude of thine iniquities, by the iniquity of thy traffic. Therefore will I bring forth a fire from the midst of thee. It shall devour thee, and I'll bring thee to ashes upon the earth in sight of all of them that behold thee. All they that know thee among the people shall be astonished at thee. Thou shalt be a terror. Never shalt thou be anymore. So obviously this is talking about Tyrus, but this is also talking about Satan, and how, he was lifted up. God made him beautiful, but he was lifted up in pride because of that. And so when the Bible says cherub, it's got this four faces, but remember, one's the face of an ox. And remember, what's an ox when it's young? It's a calf. Okay? And remember when Aaron, when he was left alone with the children of Israel, Moses was up on the mountain, he made a golden calf and they worshipped it. Why a calf? Because Satan is a cherub and he's got a face of an ox. was one of his faces. Okay? And then what about Jeroboam? Okay? When he split off with Rehoboam right after Solomon, he makes two big calves, one at the one end and one at the other end of Israel, because he doesn't want them the people of Israel to go worship in Judah, worship the true God. He wants to retain that power, right? So it's not just by accident that they make these calves. There's a reason. It's because Satan himself, as a cherub, he would have had a face of an ox, okay, or a calf. Go back to 1 Kings. And I just want to bring up one other thing that's interesting. When you see pictures or videos of in the U.S. where somebody in the government is talking, and somebody's standing in front of a podium here, and what do you see in the background? Is that big presidential seal? There's a wing on this side and a wing on that side. Isn't that? Do you think that's by accident? I don't think that's by accident. Are they trying to say they're a cherub? I don't know, but I don't think that's an accident. They got a wing on that side and a wing on that side. It's something to think about anyway. So back to 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 29. And he carved all the walls of the house round about with carved figures of cherubims and palm trees and open flowers within and without. So this would have taken some skill. All these, very ornate carvings, like on the walls and different things like that. And later, I think it tells us the doors were carved. Very beautiful work. And so there's nothing wrong with having a beautiful temple, okay? Or having a beautiful church. Now, obviously in the New Testament, we don't have the temple. The important part is the congregation. But we don't have to be in a building that's plain Jane with no electricity, no running water, not even a bathroom inside. We don't have to have that, right? So people can go overboard both ways. Our treasure shouldn't be in the building, but there's nothing wrong with having a beautiful building. Now, you don't go spend all God's money just to have a beautiful building and not do any work. That would be like you'd have your priorities mixed up. So verse 30, here's our answer. And the floor of the house he overlaid with gold within and without. So even the floor was covered with gold. I wonder, they must have had a mat outside or something, like wipe your feet or something, I don't know. Or they just didn't have tread that would grab stones, or maybe there's grass ahead, I don't know. Whatever, this is how they decided to make it, right? Or how God wanted them to make it. I think I skipped 29. And he carved all the walls of the house round about with carved figures of cherubims, and palm trees, and open flowers within and without. So outside too. Okay, all over he's got these figures. And the floor of the house he overlaid with gold, fitted without. And you wonder, why are these graven images, right? Weren't the children of Israel commanded not to make graven images? Yes, they were. And why were they commanded not to make graven images? Because they didn't see God. They don't know what he looks like. They shouldn't make an image. They shouldn't worship it. But here God's commanding this. This is okay because God's commanding these images. And notice it isn't just animals, it's only cherubs. And then God didn't command them, they just shouldn't make any images of plants or trees, just animals and people and so on, right? And this is, in either case, this is for the temple of God. God said to do it this way. But that doesn't mean now, okay, you can go make a cherub somewhere in the woods and worship it. No. In fact, even these ones carved in here, they weren't supposed to worship. This was just to bring beauty to the house and also for symbolism and so on. And then we're just about out of time here, but it talks about, let's just quickly read it. Verse number 31, and for the entering of the oracle, he made doors of olive tree. The lintel and side posts were a fifth part of the wall. For those of you that don't really have a construction background, the lintel is the wood or above a door. Okay, and those would usually rest on the posts on the side, so that the weight of whatever's above the door has to rest on somewhere, and those rest on the posts. So the lintel and side posts were a fifth part of the wall. So the post and the door and that was a fifth of the wall. So 20% of the wall was just that door. And if it was 20 cubits, which is 30, that means it was a 6-foot door. That's like just a regular double door then, right? So the ratios and that look like a normal, like there's nothing extraordinary to have a double door, right? So fifth part of the wall. 2 doors also, see, it says 2 doors. The 2 doors also were of olive tree, and he carved upon them carvings of cherubims and palm trees and open flowers, and overlaid them with gold, and spread gold upon the cherubims and upon the palm trees. So even the doors had gold. And later on, when a certain king, I think it was Hezekiah, they're trying to pay off some enemies so that they don't come attack, or was it to pay somebody else to go fight against their enemy? He takes the gold off the doors. Like they basically start picking treasure off the house. Yeah, which wasn't the right thing, right? They should have rather relied on God. But so even the doors were overlaid with gold. Verse 33, so also made for the door of the temple posts of olive tree, a fourth part of the wall. And the 2 doors were of fir tree, the 2 leaves of the one door were folding, and 2 leaves of the other door were folding. Okay. So here's the door, where one door is like, it's sort of like a closet door, it's a bifold. It's got 2 leaves. That's the way it sounds like to me. Because they're folding and the other 2 leaves, so you could kind of pull them out of the way and they don't take as much room. And he carved thereon cherubims and palm trees and open flowers and covered them with gold fitted upon the carved work. And he built an inner court with 3 rows of hewn stone, and a row of cedar beams. Okay, so the inner court had 3 rows of hewn stone and a row of cedar beams. So, they could have had 3 rows of stone, however high, and the beams like in the courtyard. And the other thing is, so they didn't have concrete, right? So they probably had a stone floor before they put wood on top of that, is what I'm thinking. And I don't know if that's what this means. I think this is outside of the house. They got kind of like a covered courtyard. The inner court. In the 4th year was the foundation of the house of the Lord laid in the month Zip. And in the 11th year, in the month Bul, which is the 8th month, was the house finished through all the parts thereof, and according to all the fashion of it, so was he 7 years in building it. And so when it says it's the 8th month, remember they started the year in the spring, right? So that might be 3 months off. So that might be like what we would call May, because it would have been 3 months after, so it would have been like November, the 8th month, because they started, we're already in the 3rd month, and they're just in the 1st month. We were already done our 3rd month, so that might have been like November, but either way, just know it doesn't necessarily mean August when it says the 8th month there, okay? And also, we're not in the Old Testament, so we don't have to have our time in this, right? So it doesn't really pertain to us that much. But one thing and we're basically done here, but I just want to bring up John chapter 2. Jesus told the Jews, he said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. And what they told him is, 46 years was this temple and building, and wilt thou rear it up in 3 days? And obviously Jesus was talking about his body, right? But, so the first time, we just read, it was built in 7 years. It was a time of peace. They had a wise king in charge of it, and they had all the materials. Everything was going smoothly. So it only took 7 years. But the second time they built it, it wasn't. They had adversaries that were trying to slow them down, and they had to clean up the rubble and so on. And it took 46 years to build it. And so 7 years the first time. That's a long construction project. Like now, if you'd have a construction project that lasted 7 years, that would be like a mega project. But 46 years, like that would be like a city project. Like that would be a huge project. And you got to realize, the difference in machinery, like that we have now compared to them. And you just wonder how fast are they going to build that 3rd temple? Well, they already got plans drawn up. In fact, the page I saw, I didn't click on the link, but they had like a scale model of it shown there how they were going to build it. So, and of course, they're probably going to build it in that high place instead of where the one actually is supposed to be, which is better than building it in the other place. But anyway, that's going to be part of the Antichrist kingdom. The abomination of desolation is going to be try to be like God, in the place of God, so people will worship Him, and the Jews and all these other fake religions are going to worship Him, and the temple is kind of when we see the temple, like when we're worried now, let's realize the temple hasn't been built yet. Okay, the temple hasn't been built yet, so we're not that close to the tribulation, because the middle of the tribulation, that's when he puts in this idol or this abomination of desolation. Okay, so in order for him to put that idol there, we got to have a temple first. Okay, so when we see things happening in the world, just remember there's certain things that got to happen first. And God also did say, like in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, that's how it's going to be when the rapture takes place. Obviously, in the 3.5 years before the rapture, it's going to get worse. But I think even at the start of those 3.5 years, it's going to be pretty bad. It's going to be, I believe, like the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, and we're not quite there yet. So here's Solomon. He's 4 years into his reign. He starts building, and in the 11th year, he finished it in the month Bol, which is the 8th month. And this was an amazing building. Remember, no tools were heard in there, so they built, made all the parts offsite, put them together. It's beautiful, and it had a significance, but this didn't contain God. Just like the Ark of the Covenant wasn't a box with God inside it like the Philistines might have thought. This was just to bring glory to God and for His name to dwell there. So this isn't where the whole earth can't contain God. So this one building can contain God. It was just to praise God and for the Israelites to make their sacrifices and so on. So let's pray. Thank you, God, for the book of 1 Kings. Thank you for chapter 6. Please help us to understand it better and not to think that the Bible is dry in some places when it gives us measurements and building procedures. And there's a lot of interesting things in your word. And help us to see wondrous things each day when we read your word. And help us continue to be amazed and to learn from your word and to apply it to our lives.